Nick.
Hey Pat, how's it going?
It's been a long time, my friend.
It's been too long. Come in.
All right, thanks.
Sure. I'll go in the living room and take a seat.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
It's my first time in your place.
Yeah, it is.
Beautiful.
Hopefully we can get a lot discussed.
You know that I was working on UFO hunters, and UFOs are a real interest of mine. I'm curious to know what new thoughts you have on UFOs.
Well, you know, I think from my perspective, it's more a case of just putting together all the data we've got and trying to examine it as a whole. You know, there are always new cases coming along, but we need to sort of focus on the overall body of data we've got, whether it's abductions, close encounter cases, landings, trace evidence on the ground, crop circles, abductions, contactees, the whole lot, because it's obviously clearly all part of the picture. So that's what I try and do. You know, I try not to get caught so much up in trends, you know, what's in vogue at any particular time, but look at it from a more broader, wider angle.
Right, yeah. But one thing I'm curious is, why do you think UFOs are important? Why would you continue writing books about this topic? And by the way, I'm just asking this question. I don't know if you have to answer the question. I don't know. Just to have...
Yeah. For me, UFOs are important because of the potential they offer us as a species. You know, potentially, even if they're extraterrestrial, interdimensional or whatever, there's still evidence that something exists outside of our realm of reality. And if that were proved, you know, never mind just the collective body of data that we've got that points in that direction, we could prove that would change the world overnight. It would, you know, alter belief systems about pretty much everything. And I think possibly that's one of the reasons why government agencies keep it quiet. Not just the fact that aliens might exist, but all these knock-on effects of what might happen if the truth came tumbling out. And so that's why I think it's so important, because it has the potential to change us. Now, whether it would change us in a good way, a bad way, or somewhere in between, I'm not sure, but I think we have a right to know what's going on, and we have a right to know if this phenomenon's real, and what it means. And for all these reasons, I think, for me at least, this is why it's important.
There is one soundbite that I love. You said something like, reality isn't as we know. Could you tell me something about that again? I like this idea that every generation tends to think it has the answers, and then the following generation discovers that the preceding generation didn't really know what they were talking about. Okay. We're always learning. Reality is always expanding.
I think the human race very much is kind of an arrogant species. We think we know everything. But you know, when you hear stories of UFOs, Bigfoot, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, ghosts, poltergeist activity, you name it, it's pretty clear to us when we get away from our computers, the internet and reality TV that, you know, we think tells us everything we ever need to know, the world is still a very, very mysterious place.
Yeah, that's what I think is funny. We can theorize, but no one really knows exactly how they built those pyramids.
No, and I think also there's the fact that deep down a lot of people don't like the idea that there could be unexplained things going on around them, and that they don't have an answer to everything. You know, people like to be able to be comfortable in the idea that everything is known. And if it isn't, it kind of upsets people's moorings to a degree. They don't know how to cope with it or handle it. You know, the idea that there could be something far stranger going on than just getting up, going to work and coming home. You know?
Do you think that's why a lot of people just tend to ignore the paranormal and these fringe things?
I think a lot of people ignore the paranormal because they get unsettled by it. I think there are some weird cases, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's UFOs, that are disturbing, and a lot of people don't like their lives disturbed.
Sure.
I think it is that simple. But I think also, you know, there are people who believe, you know, in supernatural things, but they hold rigid belief systems regarding those supernatural activities. So in other words, you know, for people who believe UFOs are just nuts and bolts aliens, they won't touch things like when Bigfoot's seen, when a UFO's seen, in the same way, you know, somebody sees a UFO hovering over Loch Ness, which has actually happened, you know. Things like that, when it crosses over, it gets too weird, even for some of the people who embrace the weird, you know. So
That's funny. Even they have their limits. So
Yeah.
This is too weird. All right. Nick, thank you for having me in your home.
sure, not a problem.
Great. As you know, I did 3 seasons of UFO Hunters.
Yes, you did.
Yes, yes. UFOs were a huge question to me, and I felt that I would arrive at some sort of truth. I'm still not sure what I've arrived at. I'm curious, after all your research, what are your thoughts on UFOs now?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that there's a real, genuine UFO phenomenon of unknown origins. And primarily, I base that conclusion on the credibility of the witnesses, you know, military personnel, radar operators, pilots, airline pilots, and government files. When you collectively put that material together, we've got a strong body of evidence that there is a real phenomenon.
So, are you telling me UFOs are real? Do you feel the UFOs are reality? Are they really, or do they really exist?
In my view, when we get rid of the hoaxes, the misidentifications, you know, the classified military aircraft, all that sort of stuff, we are left with a small percentage of reports that for me are suggestive, strongly suggestive of a real UFO phenomenon from somewhere else. Is it extraterrestrial, interdimensional, extra-dimensional, supernatural? Is it a combination of all those? I'm not sure, but there is a real phenomenon.
Fantastic. You've researched this a lot. You've written books about it. Why do you think this is something important to research? Are UFOs important?
I think the UFO subject has a potential to be important for everybody if the truth comes out. Right now, I'll be the first to admit, you know, it's a subject that fascinates a lot of people in the UFO community and attracts people who watch the occasional TV show. But if it were proven that UFOs are real, that they do exist, the government knows about it, I think that would profoundly change everybody's world overnight. And so for that reason, it is important.
Okay. What might we learn from UFOs if we discover they are extraterrestrial, or if we find out what they are?
If we do one day learn the complete truth about the UFO subject, I think we could be in for a lot of surprises, both good and maybe not so good. You know, I'll be the first to admit there are some unsettling UFO cases, some disturbing stories. And I don't think it's a case of the phenomenon being good or bad. You know, that's too black and white. I think the phenomenon is probably like the human race, you know, very much self-serving, doing its own things for its own ends. You know, we could speculate, does the UFO subject have a bearing on religion? And if it does, would it change religion? We only have to look at the world stage right now to see how fraught things can get when religious beliefs clash with the religious beliefs of somebody else. You bring aliens into the mix, suggesting they might have had some sort of involvement, then you're really sort of, you know, upsetting the situation. I think also there's the issue of technology. You know, if there have been developments, secret developments, where alien technology has been replicated, well, if that were to say, you know, let me start that bit again.
Sure.
Then there's the issue of technology. If we say, for example, hypothetically, that government agencies have replicated alien technology, and that same technology, you know, could eradicate the need for oil, overnight we could literally destabilize and bankrupt the Middle East. Look at the situation now. You bring that into the equation as well, you could be set for, you know, a third world war because you're just bankrupting and destroying entire nations by saying, we don't need you anymore. So I think a lot of the secrecy relates to that. And I think if the truth comes out, it's not just going to be the issue of, yes, aliens exist that people find amazing or that will be life-changing. It'll be these spin-off issues as well.
So you think UFO information is purposely being suppressed? Could you just make a statement about that? Who is keeping UFO knowledge from the public?
I'm personally convinced that UFO data is being suppressed at an official level, and I don't think it just relates to the fact that aliens or UFOs exist. It could be due to the economical and religious issues as well that potentially at least could go along with it. And I think as far as who's doing this, I don't necessarily think it's, quote, the government as a unified entity. I think it's probably agencies and personnel deeply buried within government, who have the luxury of black budget programs and that sort of thing, they're the ones who are hiding the really significant data.
Very good. This show is Epic, as an organization, is interested in exploring things that the mainstream doesn't explore. Topics such as cryptids, UFOs, paranormal activity. Do you have any thoughts on exploring paranormal? You do it in your books. Why is it important to explore these edges of known reality? Any thoughts on that?
One of the things that I do that a lot of people in the field don't do and don't like to do is I recognise that the UFO phenomenon seems to cross over into other areas of research. For example, very often where you see UFOs, you see Bigfoot, you see strange creatures. A classic example being Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the 1960s when Mothman appeared. You know, Mothman was about the closest thing you could imagine to like a gargoyle or a demon. But you had the Men in Black turn up, you had contactee cases, people reporting poltergeist activity in the homes. Now, ironically, the cryptozoologists don't want to deal with the UFO angle of Mothman. And the ufologists don't want to deal with the weird creature angle of what was going on in the town at the time. So they very much sort of stay poles apart. For me, I don't. You know, I see the UFO phenomenon as being sort of definitively weird, and it does cross over into these other areas. And so my view is, why shy away from that? You know, why get so deeply enmeshed into like a rigid belief system that it's got to be just nuts and bolts aliens and nothing else? Why can it not be something that's tied in with these other phenomena? And I think it is. And that's why I kind of embrace the idea of looking into other aspects of the paranormal, not just UFOs, as a single entity, if you like. So.
How real is the possibility that there is a Bigfoot and these cryptids? How about Bigfoot? Okay. Is this a real possibility?
One of the areas I kind of really dig into is Bigfoot. Now, again, I kind of hold a few alternative ideas about Bigfoot. You know, for many cryptozoologists, it's just a hidden ape that science and zoology haven't found yet. But, you know, there are a lot of weird things about Bigfoot. People talk about photographing Bigfoot and their cameras jamming, about footprints just vanishing as if the creature had disappeared, literally. And there are stories of Bigfoot just vanishing in the flash of a light. A lot of reports where Bigfoot has been seen in the same vicinity and time frame as UFO activity. And I'm inclined to think that Bigfoot is more of a paranormal type creature, in the sense that he never gets hit by cars, he never gets shot by hunters, never dies in the woods and we stumble across a body. Now, to give you a perfect analogy, most people have never seen a mountain lion, you know, other than on TV. But we know they exist. You can see them in zoos. Occasionally they get hit by cars. And that's the same for any sort of animal, except for Bigfoot and these cryptids. They're all not just elusive, they're sort of too elusive. So again, I believe there's a real phenomenon, but I kind of view it as I do UFOs from an alternative perspective that doesn't go along with the mainstream. But I don't mind that. I don't mind the fact that I'm not part of the mainstream UFO or crypto community. I enjoy being a bit of an outsider and kind of having my own theories that don't necessarily fit in with what other people think, and sometimes it's kind of fun to annoy the people I don't agree with. So, you know, that doesn't bother me in the slightest. So.
Well, there are examples in the past of where what the status quo believed wasn't necessarily the truth, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, when it comes to UFOs, although much of the subject needs to be evidence-driven, unfortunately, a lot of it is belief-driven. You know, people say, do you believe in UFOs? Well, I never try and use the term believe. What I say is that, having studied the evidence, this is why I conclude there's a real phenomenon. You know, when you start getting into belief, you know, I believe this, I believe that, then really you can bring belief into the system without actually having any evidence for it. I don't like to do that. And I think within ufology that has happened, where, you know, that people say, well, the aliens are coming from Zeta Reticuli, and abductions are being done because the aliens, you know, the alien race is dying and they need to replenish their DNA, etc., etc. That may be true, but if you say that this is the literal truth because you believe it rather than studying the evidence, then you've kind of crossed the line between being an impartial investigator and somebody who's trying to uphold a belief system, which for me, in any aspect of life, is wrong. It doesn't mean there isn't a real phenomenon, but it means treat it as what it is and don't view it as something else. So.
You bring up an excellent point. Good researchers, what good research is and what bad research is. Can you expand a little bit on what makes good research for some of these intangible topics?
As far as the research angle is concerned, I always try and take the same approach, working as a journalist as well, that I would with any journalistic story. That just because it's UFOs doesn't matter. You know, you find witnesses, you find people to speak on the record, then you try and get additional sources who can validate and offer additional input and corroborative data to the story. Then you try and track down government files. You go out to the scene and find if there's any evidence there. Kind of, you know, if you're a journalist investigating a murder case for the local 6 o'clock news, you would do exactly the same thing. So for me, that is the good approach. The bad approach is when somebody puts a story on the internet, say from Mr. X, and before you know it, it's all around the UFO chat rooms, groups, discussion lists, etc. And before you know it, within a week, it's accepted as not just the truth, but it becomes part of UFO folklore, mythology, and worse still, even history, you know, and it's accepted. And no other aspect of journalism would accept that approach, but ufology unfortunately does, you know, and there's nothing wrong with being interested in these stories and investigating them, but let's keep it in perspective as to what, you know, an anonymous story means, or what a story that hasn't been fully investigated means. It means it's still a definitive grey area. So.
Okay, so if we do research for Epic, we have to keep objective. We cannot rely on hearsay and stories, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a small break right there. It's fantastic. But if you could pick one case or a cluster of cases, where do you think the best evidence of UFOs as a reality can be found?
If you were to put me on the spot and say, you know, which is your number one UFO case, for me at least, it would be the Rendlesham Forest December 1980 case. Having grown up in Britain, I was able to, you know, explore this case very deeply, you know, and you've got very credible witnesses, an entire battery of US military personnel who were stationed near Rendlesham Forest at the time, who saw this small triangular-shaped object, reports of things tracked on radar, strange creatures seen in the woods, and more importantly, the case is only 30 years old. So most of the guys are still alive, if not everybody's still alive. They can be interviewed. So for me, all these issues put together really place Rendlesham as my number one.
And what is it about that particular case that makes it so credible?
For me, what makes Rendlesham so credible, number one are the witnesses, military personnel trained, you know, in battle scenarios and unpredictable scenarios. When they talk about seeing, you know, some sort of small craft and entities, it's difficult to deny that. The fact that we know that the military and the British government took the incident very seriously. A lot of stories about cover-up and witnesses, you know, being silenced and told not to talk about this. And the very fact that it occurred on the fringes of a significant military base, you know, that was involved in the defence of the UK at the time. This has all got to be significant and important.
What do you personally believe happened at Rendlesham?
My personal belief is that at Rendlesham, something definitively unknown manifested and people reported seeing this weird craft and these strange creatures. I don't believe there's any doubt about that. You know, the witness testimony supports it. The problem is, like a lot of cases, when they're subject to such great secrecy, how do we actually get the hard proof? You know, short of actually breaking down some heavily vaulted door, that's the only alternative. But as long as we've got the witnesses and they're credible, that, for me at least, is, you know, the number one thing.
Do you think that was an extraterrestrial craft at Rendlesham?
I think the Rendlesham craft was a craft from somewhere else. Now, was it interdimensional, extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial? Was it, as actually some of the military personnel from the base themselves suspected, even time travelers from our future? You know, who knows? But, it wasn't some stealth aircraft being test flown that crashed in the woods. No, it was something from somewhere else.
That's great. Could you expand on that a little bit? Are extraterrestrial craft necessarily extraterrestrial?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there are other explanations for these unknown craft.
Okay.
We say UFOs are from another planet, but is that necessarily the case?
I think the most important thing we always need to remember is that UFO stands for unidentified flying object. It doesn't necessarily, or it could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean alien spacecraft. You know, there are a lot of different theories: interdimensional, extra-dimensional, time travelers, paranormal, from some other weird realm that we don't understand even. There's even the theory, the so-called crypto-terrestrial theory, the idea that they're the last vestiges of some ancient human race, like the Atlanteans or something like that. Now, maybe, you know, these aren't sort of all mutually exclusive. Maybe there could be a combination of theories, and there's several different things going on. But the fact is there is a phenomenon, but I don't think we're close enough to say exactly where it originates beyond the fact that it originates somewhere. So.
Is the universe much more than we know? Is there much more to find out about the reality that we live in?
I don't think there's any doubt at all that, you know, the reality that we see around us is only a part of what is really going on. You know, we kind of live in a sort of 3D black and white world, if you like. But, you know, when people have things like weird synchronicities or ghostly encounters and strange coincidences, prophetic dreams, that sort of thing, never mind UFOs, Bigfoot, you know, when you look at all these things and put them together, I think, you know, there's a tendency in our world today to see everything black and white, sterile. It actually isn't. You only have to sort of look into the woods and the shadows and you'll see the world isn't like we think it is.
Well said, well said. So yeah, Nick, your new book coming out soon, The Pyramids in the Pentagon. Can you tell us what you've uncovered in your new book?
Well, Pyramids of the Pentagon comes out in June 2012, and it's basically a study of how government agencies since the 40s have secretly and deeply addressed the whole ancient astronauts issue and sort of ancient rituals and relics and things like, were the pyramids constructed by extraterrestrials? Was Noah's Ark actually some sort of alien spacecraft that contained the DNA of numerous Earth-based animals? Now, doing the research for the book, I actually got hold of some of the CIA's once secret files on their search for Noah's Ark. There's no doubt they looked for it. The files have now surfaced. Also, Pentagon interest in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Ancient astronaut-based authors, like, for example, George Van Tassel back in the 1950s, and also Morris Jessup, he was actually a researcher who died under very weird circumstances in the late 50s. He was someone who believed the pyramids and a lot of ancient structures were constructed using anti-gravity. And the government watched him very, very closely. So the book is basically a study of, you know, we know today that the government looks at modern day UFO activity. This is a study of how they also secretly looked at ancient era UFO activity as well.
This is fascinating because people tend to think that these are fringe topics, crazy ideas, and yet the government itself has researched some of these things. Can you briefly go into why the government would want to look into alternative theories? Of, for example, the pyramids. Why would the government be interested in the pyramids, how the pyramids were built?
If we look at it from a black and white perspective, I don't think the government per se has any interest from an archaeological perspective of wondering how or why the pyramids were constructed. They seem to have been fascinated by these legends, both ancient and modern, suggesting the pyramids may have been constructed using anti-gravity. And it's clear from looking at the files that the prime motivation was trying to determine if this ancient technology could be weaponized today. And that sounds kind of cynical, but that's what governments do. You know, they look at ways to find new and novel tools of warfare. You know, and if you can introduce anti-gravity craft into the mix, well, then you've got a perfect, you know, cheap energy source, something that's going to run rings around the enemy. So in other words, government agencies aren't secretly, you know, running around from an archaeological perspective. They're looking to see how they can use these ancient mysteries today.
Okay, great.
There's no doubt in my mind that, having looked at the research the government's done, that their interest in ancient mysteries is specifically and only derived from trying to determine if they can actually weaponize the ancient mysteries and powers of the past.
Can you give me one example? What specifically, what would be a good one?
Okay. Pyramids,
if they were using anti-gravity technology?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
So, for example, what's a specific example?
One perfect example of this would be the ancient legends suggesting that the pyramids were built by what today we would call anti-gravity. Now, if you can weaponize anti-gravity on the battlefield, you really could radically change, warfare overnight. And I think that's exactly what the government has been trying to do. Be inspired by these ancient legends and stories and try and replicate the technology in today's world.
Why would the government think ancient Egyptians were using anti-gravity technology?
From the files and documentation I've obtained, it's very, very clear that government agencies spent a lot of time digging into ancient manuscripts and records, many of which talk about the very strange way in which a lot of these pyramids were supposedly built. A lot of these ancient records talk about vast, massive stones being lifted into the air by so-called magical powers that the magicians of that day would possess, but that sound just like, what if we could, I guess, develop anti-gravity, it would fall into that category from our perspective today.
Wow, the text actually mentioned this, that the stones are levitated. Wow,
Okay.
wow, that is...
Do you want me to talk about it?
I guess you could,
Okay,
Matt.
yeah.
I didn't realize. They're
Yeah.
real manuscripts, text?
Yeah. There are a number of manuscripts actually going back more than 1,000 years that talk about the pyramids supposedly being constructed in a fashion where, like, so-called magicians would use what was called magical papyrus, and they would strike the stones and they would lift into the air, not very high, just a few feet, and they would sort of sail along like a boat on the water. Then after sort of 50, 60 feet, they would drop down again. They would be struck again, and they would lift into the air again. What's intriguing is that supposedly these stones would move through what was described as almost like a walkway that was surrounded by large rods of iron. And it sounds like some ancient technology was being used to sort of lift the stones and then push them along and then lift them and push them along and actually raise them and carefully push them into place. And we talk about, stones weighing literally tons and tons.
Are the pyramids still a mystery today? Have we figured out how they were made?
I mean, anyone today can go and see the pyramids in Egypt. They're just sort of a stone's throw from Cairo. And people come up with all sorts of theories concerning their construction. People say, well, it was rollers, and tree trunks and ropes. But that doesn't necessarily explain how you get a multi-ton stone at the very top of the Great Pyramid. It's not enough to simply say, oh, it was rollers and ropes and trees. That's just not enough. And I think for that reason, the mystery of the pyramids remains that. It's a mystery shrouded in a mystery, and I think it always will be. I don't think we'll ever have sort of a concise, unanimous view as to how they were constructed.
Brilliant. One last sentence. Have any engineers or scientists today offered a feasible explanation or an explanation for how the pyramids were built? Is it still really unproven?
A lot of theorists have come up with ideas and scenarios as to how the pyramids could have built, like using ramps and rollers and things like that. But I think unless somebody actually takes the time to quite literally, and I do mean quite literally, replicate the Great Pyramid of Giza and say, I'm going to build one, then we're never really going to be able to say for sure that any of these theories have any validity to them. So.
Brilliant.
The book I'm working on right now is called The World's Weirdest Places, and basically it's like my own personal selection of the 25 strangest places in the world. Now, if somebody sees a UFO over New York, that doesn't make New York weird. In the same way, if somebody sees Bigfoot over Seattle, it doesn't make Seattle weird. But when you get, say, a UFO, a Bigfoot, a ghost, a werewolf, a portal, and strange phenomena all concentrated on one little area, that suggests the place is weird. So that's the theme of the book. Sort of certain areas around the world that seem to be concentrated with just bizarre paranormal activity of a whole range of different things. And my view is that many of these areas could potentially be what we call portals or window areas or gateways, where, for example, quantum physics today is allowing for the existence of multi-dimensions, and maybe these dimensions cross paths with ours. So in other words, some of these areas around the world may act as literal doorways to allow phenomena from other realms to come into ours, and that's why certain parts of the world seem so weird compared to others that are so bland, if you like. So I'm basically picking my top 25, which includes Loch Ness, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, Jefferson, Texas, Bermuda Triangle, places like this where there's a rich history of just varied strangeness going on.
Okay, take a breather. I just want to follow that up with, so do you feel there's some kind of physical, scientific reason for the weirdness in these areas?
Okay. I personally think because all these, I personally think that with all these different areas being so weird, there has to be a reason why. You know, it's not just random chance. And my personal view is we look at quantum physics, which allows for the existence of multi-dimensions. I think some of these places, if not all of them, act as sort of portals or doorways where phenomena from other realms can enter our world. And that's why these places act as kind of paranormal magnets, if you like. I've investigated a lot of reports of so-called cryptids, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra. There's no doubt in my mind they all exist. You know, the big question is, are they flesh and blood animals? Are they paranormal? Is it a combination of the two? I think it's probably the latter.
Okay, fantastic. What about, like you were saying, ancient civilizations that precede ours? Maybe we think Graham Hancock's fingerprints of the gods or something like that. Is it possible that we existed once before in another time?
When we look at the civilizations that came before us, it's quite clear, you know, they had access to advanced technology, knowledge of astronomy and things like this. I think we don't really give the ancients the credit they deserve, and I think possibly, you know, there could even have been races, advanced ones, that came long, long before us and that have been obliterated to history and whatever their own actions were.
Fantastic, great. What are your thoughts on the paranormal, ghosts?
Okay. Like UFOs, I think, you know, the ghost phenomena is a real one. You know, are we seeing spirits of the dead, or are we seeing some sort of weird time loop, you know, where actions from the past are being played over and over again, as some people suggest? Again, it could be a combination of both of them. I don't rule anything out when it comes to, you know, the paranormal, really.
Great, great. Near-death experiences? Do you have any? And if you don't have any opinion, just say I really don't know.
Okay. You don't have to answer the question. I'm just throwing things out there. What? Yeah.
No, I can
anything
answer that
on near-death experiences,
Yeah.
out-of-body experiences?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on consciousness leaving the body?
Okay. I think the biggest mystery of all that people want answering, you know, is there life after death? And I think when you look at things like near-death experiences, the main thing we have to realise is that these accounts are consistent. You know, people talk about seeing a bright light, leaving their bodies, and obviously being returned to them because they then relate the accounts to us afterwards. So I think this collective body of data is important and needs to be addressed to try and determine, you know, exactly what is going on.
It's a big show on TV now called Ancient Aliens. Any thoughts on it?
On the show itself?
I'm sorry. On the possibility of ancient aliens.
Okay. I think if we look at a lot of ancient texts from, you know, thousands of years ago, we can place a lot of the, you know, the wonders and actions of the gods, etc., in an alien perspective. You know, the idea that the gods coming down and offering us advanced technologies, it kind of sounds like the sort of thing we might do if we went to another world. So I think UFOs, extraterrestrials, it might not just be a modern day phenomenon.
Brilliant, very good. Remote viewing, any thoughts on remote viewing? Government remote viewing?
Remote viewing, you know, it's a controversial area, the idea that you could psychically use your mind to spy on the enemy, so to speak. But the very fact that government agencies have researched this subject deeply suggests they recognise it's a real phenomenon. I think when it comes to governments keeping secrets, it depends on the nature of the secret. I mean, with UFOs, ironically, one of the reasons why the subject's been so successfully hidden is because most people don't believe it. You know, the mainstream media doesn't address the subject, so that helps the secrecy as well. And so I think something like this can be hidden quite easily. Other issues, you know, the president has an affair or whatever, that comes tumbling out because the mainstream media does believe it, so they do investigate it. That's the big difference with UFOs. The secret can be hidden because nobody's really looking other than the UFO community. I think there are very good reasons for government secrecy when it comes to UFOs. Probably to a degree the fear of public panic. Also the economic issue of introducing potentially advanced technologies derived from aliens into our world, and also the religious implications. And when you've got all three, you've really got, you know, a huge hot potato. The main reason why I feel it's important that paranormal research groups don't just focus on UFOs or ghosts or cryptids, but embrace the whole range of strange phenomena is it's clear to me they're all interconnected. So it's important that we do broach all these different subjects, not just to determine what the connection is, but really, if we avoid looking at some of these issues, we're potentially ignoring crucial data. I think that when it comes to UFOs particularly, but certainly all the other paranormal phenomena as well, if we get the answers, they're going to definitively and I think profoundly have an impact on everybody's lives.
Nick, it's been a fascinating conversation as always. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pat. All right. I'm Nick Redfern, and join me on epic voyages as we investigate everything from Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and weird places.
Brilliant.
Yeah, great.
Great. It is actually.